Today we are going to be exploring the unsolved mystery Iceberg. We are currently well into the 3rd tier, and there are 11 tiers in total. For those of you who haven't seen the previous videos, we're going to explore stuff like unsolved murders and disappearances, to terrifying space and quantum mysteries. And the stuff just gets weirder and darker the further down the iceberg we go. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is green tea, and join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. So first up, we have Don Decker. This was a man in 1983 Pennsylvania who claimed to be able to make rain out of thin air. His ability to do this, he said, came from a demonic possession, which happened just after the death of his grandfather. His grandfather was apparently abusing him, and after his death, he was seemingly haunted by his grandfather, with one occurrence describing him being in a room, and rain just seemingly coming from the ceiling, from the walls, just all over, and they weren't able to find a source for the rain. And there's not much evidence for this one, it's really just whether you believe his account or you don't. Dora Ruth Smith was the strange case of a 47-year-old woman who went missing in 1977 Alabama. She was last seen in her house and then apparently just left her house in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. She left behind like everything she had, her dentures, her purse, her keys, even all of her clothes, and she was just wearing a nightgown when she left. Her husband said he saw her get into a lime green Ford car, but that car has never been located or found or identified. In 2003, so 26 years after Dora went missing, the people living in Dora's old home found an envelope containing a letter and cash. There was like $200 cash in there, and the letter said, "They are trying to take my food away and kill me. Please help me." So it was as if she was storing this letter secretly in the walls and was maybe planning on sending it to someone, but she unfortunately never got the chance. So after her disappearance, they did a whole search. They did somewhat suspect foul play or murder, and cadaver dogs did actually pick up on a scent in a certain area of the garden, but after they dug around the area, nothing was really found. Dora's family believes that the police simply didn't dig deep enough, but that was the extent and outcome of the investigation. So as of today, it remains a mystery. DrDisrespect Twitch ban. So DrDisrespect, for those who don't know, is this guy. He is was a Twitch streamer who played this over-the-top 80s action hero sort of figure. Anyway, he was pretty popular at the time and pretty entertaining to watch, I guess. And he was one of the biggest streamers on Twitch until he was banned in 2020 for unknown reasons. So in March of that year, he had basically signed a contract with Twitch, which extended for multiple years, and it paid him to stay on the platform. But in June of that year, only a few months later, his channel was suddenly removed from Twitch, and there were rumors going around that he was permanently banned. Soon after this, Twitch said that DrDisrespect had violated some community guidelines, but they wouldn't give any more information, and initially DrDisrespect had no idea why he was banned. Later on, he did eventually find out, but he never made that reason clear to the public. He has remained banned ever since. He moved to YouTube for his streaming platform, and a year later, DrDisrespect decided to sue Twitch for banning him. And after a year of litigation, they both just decided to settle, with neither side admitting any fault and with no money exchanging hands. And to this day, the reason why one of the most popular streamers was banned from Twitch is still unknown. So Dracula is a reference to the lost 1920s Russian film. Very little is known about it, or whether it did even exist at all. According to some sources, Viktor Tojansky was the director of the film, but claims like that are very, very far from being confirmed. We don't know anything about the plot or the actors in the film, and we don't have any footage or even stills of it. But if this film does or did exist, it would actually be the first film adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 Dracula novel. Some people suggest that if it was made in the 1920s, that it may very well have been destroyed destroyed in the Russian Civil War, or that the claim that it was made in the 1920s is a little unbelievable and far-fetched, as most film productions stopped in Russia during their civil war. But it is an interesting one, even if this is all we have to go off. Earth's water. So here's another space one, and that is the question of where Earth's water came from. If you've ever looked out into the ocean, you can see that we have a lot of water, obviously. But there are quite a few theories about where this water might have come from. So I'll do a little demonstration here. But after the birth of our sun, there was a nest of gas surrounding the sun after the explosion. This mix of gases orbited the sun and is known as the solar nebula. This mixture of stuff contained in it all the necessary elements to build all of our planets. And actually the composition of our planets for the most part depends on how far away from the sun they were. But back to the topic of water, hydrogen, which is one of water's elements, was actually around back then, but the early Earth likely didn't have enough time or size to collect and hold a lot of this hydrogen before it escaped out into space. And if these gases didn't come from the solar nebula, then where did they come from? Well, more and more scientists think that the water must have come from space in the form of comets. So when the solar system was forming, the planets closer to the center were far too warm to form ice. But ice would have likely been able to form on the planets that were further out. So one theory suggests that the oxygen and hydrogen formed water. The water then froze around planets like Jupiter. Then in the relatively early years of the solar system, the larger planets would essentially launch debris and comets at the inner smaller ones, due to essentially things falling out of orbit with the larger ones and flying towards the center of the solar system. Some of these were apparently comets of solid ice. They hit into our young Earth, and these all eventually melted, forming the lovely water we know today. This is a friendly reminder to remember to drink water. Another theory suggests that instead of ice in the form of comets, Earth was bombarded by asteroids, which didn't store the elements as water, but rather stored them as mineral in rocks. So these asteroids hit into our early Earth, and the rocks from the asteroids over time got absorbed into our Earth's mantle. And when eventually exposed to our incredibly hot core, these rocks melted, the elements combined, and they formed water. And the water came up to the surface eventually through volcanoes and stuff like cracks in our Earth's mantle. This was probably in the form of something like steam, which then eventually got recycled and settled as water. So this topic goes a lot deeper into many of these theories, and it was, as always, a super interesting one to research. But if you like stuff on space or the early Earth's timeline, then definitely check this one out. The East Bay rock walls are a series of rocky walls built all over California. These are mainly in the San Francisco area, and their origin is more or less unknown. They aren't walls or fences, so to speak, as they aren't continuous and they don't actually go up very high. They were thought maybe to have been used as marking areas for travelers, or of barriers of some sort to help with rounding up animals, but their actual purpose is still a mystery, as there are no records as to who built them, when, or why. There were recently some tests done on the rocks, which suggest that they were built somewhere between 1850 and 1880. So this would have been in an early American California, but whether they were built by early European settlers, Native Americans, Mexicans, or someone or something else entirely, we have no clue. Eileen Moore Lighthouse Keepers. This is a reference to a small island in the Hebrides, which in itself is an archipelago or collection of many small islands off the coast of Scotland. This particular small island, Eileen Moore, was completely uninhabited except for the lighthouse keepers who lived on the island. In 1900, a small ship was headed to the island that actually had a replacement lighthouse keeper, Joseph Moore on board. When they arrived to the island, none of the 3 lighthouse keepers were there to greet them, so they blared their ship's horn and still received no response. They then fired a flare, and when they got no response to that, they began to get a bit worried. Joseph Moore then took a rowboat to the island, and he slowly made his way up the cliff to the lighthouse. Apparently on his journey up there, he had an overwhelming sense of bad foreboding. When he reached the lighthouse, he noticed immediately that something was wrong. The front door of the lighthouse was left open, and 2 of the heavy raincoats were missing. He went onto the kitchen area and found that there was a meal that was half eaten, and a chair that had been upturned. So it was almost as if someone was eating at the table and then jumped up quickly in a hurry and didn't finish their meal. On top of this, the clocks had all mysteriously stopped, and they figured that whatever happened must have happened around a week ago, as that's when the logs for the lighthouse stopped. And after discovering all this, they did a full search of the island but found no bodies. When they did further checks of the logs of the lighthouse, they noticed some of the entries were a bit strange. A week before this incident, the second assistant had written of winds so severe that they hadn't seen anything like them in 20 years. He noted that the principal lighthouse keeper was unusually quiet, and that the third assistant had been crying. Now, the third assistant, who was William MacArthur, was a seasoned mariner, and he was known for being kind of a tough guy. So for him to be crying over a bit of wind seems really strange. The next day in the logs, December 13th, stated that the storm had actually gotten worse and that all 3 of the men were praying. And this entry is also kind of strange, as you wouldn't expect 3 seasoned seamen and lighthouse keepers who must be completely used to wind and rain and heavy storms by now, and who must have known that they were perfectly safe up in the lighthouse where they were, which was a brand new lighthouse at the time and was very high up above the ocean on an island. So to be worried and praying about a storm seemed a little strange. And to make things even stranger, there were no reported storms on the 12th, 13th or 14th of December, with all reported conditions being calm and steady. The final log entry, marked on the 15th of December, simply stated, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." But what was meant by God is over all is still unknown. Why any of the lighthouse keepers would leave the lighthouse in the middle of winter without one of their coats is one part of the mystery, as is why all 3 men left together, because this is strictly prohibited and abnormal in the rules and regulations for the lighthouse, which states that there must always be at least 1 lighthouse keeper in the lighthouse at all times, just in case emergencies or in case of accidents. They would always have 1 lighthouse keeper maintaining or monitoring the lighthouse. Further searches of the island revealed a bunch of rope, which was just scattered and strewn over the rocks near the landing platform. These ropes were normally stored in a crate attached to the supply crane, which was 70 feet above the landing platform. So the first theory they came up with was that the crane had fallen down in the high winds, and the crew had gone down to rescue the crane, and had all been hit with an unexpected wave and dragged out into the ocean. But there were several holes in this theory. Why was one of the men without a coat in the middle of the winter? Why had none of the bodies then washed up on shore? Why did all 3 of the men leave at the same time when they knew it was against the rules? And how were 3 very experienced seamen and lighthouse keepers surprised by a wave? You'd think if anyone would have been able to maneuver this situation, that it would have been these 3 men. And that all brings us back to the lack of reported storms by nearby islands. The Lewis Island, which is actually able to view the lighthouse at Eileen Moor with the naked eye, reported a clear sea and a clear view of the lighthouse during those 3 days. So today, 123 years later, the disappearance of these 3 men and the strange circumstances surrounding them remains a mystery to us. Some people suggest it was poisoning, which then led to group hysteria and delusions. Some suggest that pirates or invaders took the men, and some suggest it was an alien abduction. But nobody really knows, and maybe no one except those three men will ever know. Einstein's last words. Einstein's last words is a reference to the fact that just before his death, Einstein uttered a few words, or a sentence, or two sentences. It's a little unclear, but it was in his native tongue of German. The mystery, however, comes from the fact that the nurse, who was the only person in the room with him at the time, didn't actually speak German. So whatever he said in those final moments, and what thoughts he was expressing to himself or to the world, we will never know. El chubacabra is a creature reported in various areas of the Americas. It is literally Spanish for goat sucker, which, while that makes for a great insult, actually refers to the fact that El chubacabra is known for attacking and sucking the blood out of livestock, including goats. It is often described as a heavy reptilian alien-like creature, roughly the size of a small bear, and with a row of spines reaching from the neck to the base of the tail. However, in some sightings, it has also been described as more dog-like. So in 1975, a series of livestock killings was reported in the small town of Mocha, Puerto Rico. These were attributed to Vampiro de Mocha, and since then, similar attacks on livestock have been reported ever since. These animals were found dead, completely drained of blood, with small incision holes somewhere on their bodies. Theories of who or what made these attacks range from aliens to satanic cults, but over time the legend of El Chupacabra became the main suspect in a lot of these cases. But El Chupacabra has never been captured, so there are many that believe that it is still out there roaming around, hunting and draining its prey completely of blood. Eloko is the name for a dwarf-like creature that lives in the forests of the Congo. They eat only human flesh and are thought to be spiritual ancestors of the people who live there. Eloko, which is the plural for Eloko, are said to live in the deepest, darkest parts of the rainforest, and they are apparently quite jealous, quite vicious, and they ferociously guard the forest's rare game and fruit. They live inside hollow trees and they wear nothing but leaves, and they have no hair with only grass growing on their bodies. They also have piercing eyes, sharp claws, and mouths that can open wide enough to consume an entire human, dead or alive. They also possess small bells, which are used to cast spells on anyone nearby, but it is thought that carrying a amulet or something similar will ward off any spells if you are unlucky enough to be targeted by one. One tale cited by Jan Nappert goes like this. One day, a hunter took his wife, at her insistence, into the rainforest, where he had a hut with a palisade around it. When he went out to inspect his traps, he told her, "When you hear a bell, do not move. If you do, you will die." Soon after he had left, she heard the charming sound of a little bell coming closer, for the Eloko has a good nose for feminine flesh. Finally, a gentle voice asked to be let into his room. It was like the voice of a child. The woman opened the door, and there was an Eloko, smelling like the forest, looking small and innocent. She offered him banana mash with fried fish, but he refused. "We eat only human meat. I have not eaten for a long time. Give me a piece of your arm." At last, the woman consented, totally under the spell of the Eloko. That night, the husband found her bones. This is pretty creepy stuff, but I guess the moral of the story is that if you ever go to the Congo, always bring an amulet with you. On June 16th, 1991, a bank robbery and shooting took place at the United Bank Tower in Denver, Colorado. The bank robber killed 4 unarmed bank guards and forced 6 bank tellers into the vault. Roughly $200,000 was stolen from the bank, and this honestly seems to be like a one-man heist rather than a full bank robbery. The suspect snuck in through the back elevator, convincing the guard that he was someone of importance. Then he forced the guard at gunpoint to go down to the lower level of the bank, where he killed him and took his security pass. Using this pass, he then went to the guard guardroom, where he killed 3 other guards and then went on to do the bank robbery. None of the guards were actually armed, as a year before this, the United Bank Tower had actually changed their policy that meant that the guards weren't allowed to have guns. During the robbery, the suspect picked up all of the casings from the bullets that he had fired, and he also removed several tapes of security footage and guard logs, meaning that there was less evidence overall to find out who did this. 3 weeks after the robbery, police arrested James W. King, who was a retired police officer, for this robbery. But after only a few days of deliberation, the jury acquitted James King, and since then, no one else has been brought forward, none of the stolen money was ever found, and the identity of the robber remains a complete mystery. Flying mist mattress was a phenomenon seen by a lady in 2001 Kansas. Judy and her friend were driving along Highway 36 when a large rectangular mist flew across the road in front of them. The cloud was described as being wider than her car, 2 feet thick, and hovering 3 feet above the road. It was never properly explained, but people suspect that it could be the doing of ghosts, aliens, a secret government project, or just a very peculiar weather occurrence. Frances Marshall was a woman killed in New Zealand 1914. She had been missing that night after visiting a friend, and when her husband woke up that morning, he was informed that she had been murdered. She was found in an alleyway with 25 wounds to her head, neck, and chest. Her skull was fractured, and her heart and lungs had been stabbed multiple times. She likely died from just sheer blood loss, and there was no sign of a struggle or robbery, and no knife ever found. There were also no reports of a disturbance of any kind by anyone, so it's likely that she was just ambushed and taken by surprise. She was wearing just one of her gloves at the time, and her hat was still strangely on her head when she was found. There was very little information regarding this case, but it's still one of the most horrific cases in New Zealand since the First World War. The Frog Boys were a group of 5 boys in South Korea who went missing in 1991. They were aged between 9 and 13, and all disappeared after searching for salamander eggs during a public holiday. The president of South Korea ordered a massive search by police and military, but sadly the boys weren't found until 2002, 11 years later. The remains of the boys were found nearby where they went missing. The bodies showed signs of blunt force trauma, and they were very likely taken and attacked by someone, but to this day nobody has been charged for these horrific crimes, and the rhyme or reason for them is still unknown. There was actually a 6th boy in the group, but he left and went back home after his mum had warned him not to stray too far, which saved his life and has likely stuck with him to this day. Functionalism. So this is a pretty complex philosophical one, but functionalism basically defines states or emotions not by their internal components and structures, but by their function. As an example, pain isn't defined by our nerves or brain state, but rather as a state that tends to be caused by bodily injury to produce the belief that something is wrong with the body and the desire to be out of that state, to produce anxiety, and in the absence of any stronger conflicting desires, to cause wincing or moaning. So by this definition, pain can even be felt by things like robots and androids. This is a very interesting and deep one on the meaning of things, so if meaning is your thing, definitely check it out. Gloria Sullivan was a 14-year-old girl murdered in 1943. She had led a rough early life, being abandoned by her parents, and then growing up in foster care. The foster mum had died a few years back, and the foster dad was out to work every day. So that left Gloria at home to do the chores and the shopping and the cooking and the cleaning and all of her schoolwork as well. She was apparently very good at these things, and the foster father, Patrick, truly loved her as he would his own child. Throughout the morning of that fateful day, various neighbors came by to see Gloria, either just to chat or to return something that they borrowed, and none of them really noticed anything strange. Then at 10:20 a.m., Dorothy Weedig, who was a schoolmate of Gloria's, turned up at the house as they had arranged to go on a little shopping trip. But the front door was locked from the inside, the curtains were drawn, and there was no answer when Dorothy knocked, so she just eventually left. Then when Patrick came home from work, he immediately noticed that something was off. The front door was unlocked, and the radio in the house was turned on, and it was turned all the way up. Patrick walked in, and when he entered the kitchen, he found Gloria lying dead on the floor, having been stabbed 20 times in the back, chest, and throat. Gloria was fully dressed, and there was no signs of an assault, and the rest of the house was in perfect order, with nothing even being taken. Everyone who knew Gloria couldn't reasonably come up with a motive for her killing, or any potential suspects. She didn't have any enemies, she didn't have any boyfriends or potential boyfriends. It was a really strange killing with seemingly no motive. They suspected it might have been her biological father who killed her for some reason, but when they went to look for him, he had apparently just disappeared off the face of the earth, and he was declared legally dead in 1950. Patrick would sadly never get over the death of his foster daughter, and would frequently visit the police station to check if anything new had come up on the case. He died 4 years after this from a heart attack at only 59 years old. Although there was some evidence found at the scene, like various blood prints, the killer was never found, and this brutal, senseless killing was never solved. Gordon Sanderson was a 26-year-old man found shot dead in a septic tank in Alberta. In 1977, he was found unidentified, but tests done in 2021 found him to be Gordon Sanderson. He was an indigenous man and was found wrapped in a yellow bedsheet tied with nylon rope. Before his death, Gordon was tortured. He was beaten, tied up, burnt with a torch and cigarettes, and had his you-know-what mutilated with a sharp object. He was then shot at least twice in the head and chest before being dumped in the septic tank in which he was found. The authorities had very little to go off on this one, so his case just kind of went cold and it was never solved. Granger Taylor was a 32-year-old man who went missing in 1980 British Columbia. Granger was big into aliens. The man's got taste, and would often talk about them, even building his own life-size spacecraft with a friend out of old satellite dishes. On the day of his disappearance, his stepfather noticed a note on his bedroom door. On the back of the map was a hand-drawn map of one of the local mountains, and on the front was a note. "Dear mother and father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship. As recurring dreams assured, a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe and then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger." In his will, Granger had recently made 2 edits. 1, the word funeral was deleted, and 2, the word death was replaced with the word departure. He was never seen again, but some bones and a shirt were found in a nearby mountain 6 years later that were strongly suspected to belong to Granger, so the case was closed. But many close friends and family believe this not to have been Granger, but suspect that the government had kidnapped him for certain alien knowledge that he had, or that he had been murdered and covered up, or that he had actually departed on a journey across the universe. But whichever one you believe, it is a sad case that Taylor Granger, who was loved by many, never made his return. And that, I'm afraid, is all we have time for. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. If you did enjoy the video, you can always leave it a like and subscribe, as it does help me out massively and it'll keep you informed on any future content I put out. Check out our Discord if you haven't already, and I will see you all real soon in the next episode. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.